Oops, sorry. Okay, so tonight's talk will really focus on why we need nature. I'm just checking, I'm trying to scroll through. I'm going to try to reshare because I'm not able to. Do I have control of my screen? I should, I think. There we go. So the goals for this evening is that we learn something new. Hopefully you walk away with maybe one fact you didn't know before you came. I think it's also important to feel compelled to act in whatever way you're inspired to do so, and then also to certainly spend more time in nature. I'm having an issue sliding through it. I'm not sure why. Oh, okay. The introduction of myself, thank you for the introduction, Aniko, and thank you for the invitation to speak this evening. But yes, I'm a wife and a mother, an educator, and the co-author of the Fresh Air Kids book series. And we also just launched Revivin', where we bring environmental ideas to life through a podcast. Okay, so we're going to start by, I will have you take a moment to look at the images that you're seeing. Just take a minute to take them in, but also to consider why I may be showing you these images. So I'll give you a moment to process this. Okay, these images are images of 50 words that were removed from the Oxford Junior Dictionary in the 2007 and 2012 edition of those dictionaries. This is a child-centric dictionary. As you can see, we have a picture of an acorn, a bluebell, a chestnut, clovers, the kingfisher, and a newt. And these words were replaced with more technological terms, such as cut and paste, broadband, blog, and chat room. This caused a great stir from many authors who said these words need to be part of our vernacular. We need to understand them. And I think Carl Linnaeus, who is a Swedish biologist and physician, said it best when he said, if you do not know the names of things, the knowledge of them is lost too. For me, this proves that once again, we're distancing ourselves from the natural world, thinking somehow that there's a separation between humans and nature when really we need to coexist together. And so my point is that we can't lose this vernacular for part of what exists in the natural world. So I'm going to segue quickly. Sorry, I'm having issues with slide control. So let's see. Okay, to the concept of biomimicry. Biomimicry is a practice that learns from and mimics the strategies used by living organisms to solve challenges incomparable to the ones we face as individuals. And this is really important, which will take me to my next slide, hopefully. And it states that for all challenges we face, nature has solutions. And I think we can all be in agreement that the natural world faces a great deal of challenges today, and biomimicry might be an answer. So why am I telling you this? Well, back on slide 4, I gave you a picture of the kingfisher, which is on the right of my screen. And on the left of the screen is Japan's high-speed train known as the Shinkansen. And this single bird's beak was the influence and the innovation behind the high-speed bullet train in Japan, because they studied the way that the kingfisher dives into water. If we remove species from our vocabulary, we could lose necessary innovation for the natural world. This innovation is also extends to the Wright brothers who powered flight, and that was inspired by birds. Our own Swiss George de Maistral was responsible for the implementation of Velcro. After a hunting trip, he and his dog came back. They were covered in burrs. He removed the burrs and was so interested in them that he looked at them under a microscope and found that they all had little tiny hooks on them. 20 years later, he invented Velcro. And medical bandages and adhesives were inspired by geckos' feet. So another argument that we need to maintain the language and our connection to the natural world. So why exactly do we need nature? Humans are now deemed for the first time ever as of 2008 as an urban species, meaning more of us than ever are now dwelling in urban or city environments. In 1800s, that was just about 3% of the population was living in cities, but now that has flipped and we have more people than ever living in cities. The World Health Organization estimates that by about 2050, almost 70% of us will be living in cities. And I think three things will evolve from this. Either one, cities will have enriched urban design where we're bringing more nature into urban environments because we need that in order to thrive, or we'll continue to distance ourselves from the natural world, or thirdly, we'll make a flip and go back to home or more natural environments. We also have an infiltration of technology, which is, we just can't argue it anymore. And this is a statistic stating, covering the span of 2012 to 2024, looking at individuals from the ages of 16 to 64 years old on a global scale. And we can see that we've increased drastically our use. This is for time spent daily on social networking by internet users worldwide. And this doesn't even account for how often we utilize a cell phone, which according to the Brussels Times on June 3rd of 2022 indicated that we're touching our phone about over 2,000 times a day, and that's not even considered heavy use. And I want to just back up quickly and state is that we used to govern our time by natural time, and by that I mean we would govern our days by the seasons. We were very much in rhythm with the seasons. We would rise with the sunrise. We would go to bed with the sunset. Now our worlds are very different. We're governed by mechanical time. So we're allowing our screens, our computers, our monitors, our digital calendars to dictate how our days unfold. And this is very different than the past. And this leads me to this. Richard Louv is one of my favorite authors. He has written, I think, more than 10 books. And he says the more high-tech we become, the more nature we need. He's also responsible for coining the term nature deficit disorder. In his book, Last Child in the Woods, that single book had such an impact on me, it influenced the way that we decided to raise our children. And nature deficit disorder is the concept or the idea that human beings, especially children, are spending less time outdoors, and the belief that this change results in a wide range of behavioral problems. So how do we actually spend our time? Again, the World Health Organization has stated that Europeans are now spending 90% of our time indoors. So we're spending very little of our free time outside and in nature. Perhaps if we were to switch the trajectory of the infiltration of technology, we would have more time to go outside and to enjoy natural environments. And how much time do we actually need as humans outdoors? There are a lot of theories on this. There are a lot of statistics. A lot of doctors are weighing in on it. But before I divulge what doctors are saying, I think it's important for us to take a moment to think of how we feel outside, how much time we actually think we need as individuals, and as a collective, maybe that's part of our families as well. There is a neuroscientist, Dr. Rachel Hopman, who invented the 25-3 rule, which means that we need 20 minutes outdoors 3 days per week, 5 hours per month in natural settings, and at least 3 days per year in a wild or nature setting. And then there was an article that came out in the New York Times, which is an American-based publication, that looked at over 20,000 people in England. And what they found was that 120 minutes per week was kind of the balance that made people contributed to well-being, and it also had better health outcomes. Again, I think this is really up to the individual, to accessibility to nature, to how you feel in nature, to your schedule. But I think we need to really dictate that for ourselves. But those are just a few ideas on how much time we can or should be spending outside. And nature prescriptions are something that have been around since the 1990s. They were implemented in New Zealand, but we've been using them to really encourage more people to spend more time outdoors. America has the Park RX America. These are also known as green prescriptions. In America, they're using these prescriptions for individuals who suffer from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. To help with weight loss, this is shown in studies to really help individuals who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and to encourage children to play. Korea and Japan have long known that forest bathing and forest healing is very important for human health. Scotland uses prescriptions for nature to combat high blood pressure, depression, and anxiety. And then the Nordic regions have known that, quote, open air living is very beneficial to our overall health. And then biophilia comes into play here because this is humans' natural affinity for the natural world. We are inclined to feel comfortable in the natural world, to seek the natural world, to feel vitality when we're in nature. This term first came to fruition in the 1960s from Erich Fromm, who is a German psychologist. It was later made popular in the 1980s by E.O. Wilson, who is an author, a biologist, and a naturalist. And it's really our genetic affinity for humans to be in nature. And biophilia is also influencing architectural design, design in general. It's been contributed to productivity, increased productivity in the workplace, cognitive benefits for children, and it's used a lot in hospital design. And there was a study that dates back to the 70s and 80s by Roger Ulrich. And what he found in almost 10 years, he studied patients who had had gallbladder surgery. And he found that patients were in two separate sections. One, the patients overlooked a brick wall. And then the patients, two, overlooked a natural setting or trees. And what they found is the patients who had a room with a window view had better health outcomes. They're healing, they were discharged sooner from the hospitals. They also needed less pain medication, and they had better notes in their charts from the nurses. Since then, window studies have become very, very popular to gauge productivity in the workplace, cognitive benefits for children in school settings. So this is very important in the design practice. And I think anyone who's ever been in a hospital setting knows that there's a real affinity to be attached to the living world, that we long for that. And so, I mean, I can speak from experience, even having sunlight on your face in a hospital setting is really a very powerful experience. And biophilic design is utilized now in hospitals where architects will really try to design a hospital that incorporates nature within the design, but also permits patients to have access to nature and to have rooms that incorporate greenery and nature with them. There is a series of 5 hospitals in Belgium by the architect Vincent Callebaut. I may be saying that wrong, but they have 5 pillars that they design their hospitals around. One of those pillars includes well-being and biophilia. So it's that important from an architectural standpoint. And then to talk about forest bathing, this originated in Japan in the 1980s. It's known as Shinrin Yoku. It's not a hike, but more of a slow, peaceful meandering. It ignites the senses. And something I think it's really important to talk about is our senses. When we're inside and spending most of our days inside, oftentimes we try to dampen our senses. And so that might be, if we're working in a space, we might lower blinds because the sun is too bright. We may put on noise canceling headphones because we need to really concentrate. But we're always dampening the senses inside, but outside all of our senses are activated and engaged. And this is really part of our evolution, and it's really important for us. Forest bathing also has a meditative quality to about it, and it allows us to be focused on the present and infusing a natural slowing down. Some of the health outcomes of forest bathing, and this comes from the book Walking in the Woods, is that it actually boosts our immunity. It increases our ability to relax, reduces cortisol levels or our stress levels, can lower blood pressure, and certainly enhances the mood. But this isn't just for forest bathing. We have very positive and helpful outcomes whenever we're exposed to nature, whether that be a lake, if it's an ocean. And we have lower stress levels. We synthesize vitamin D from sunlight exposure. Sorry for that. We may experience lower cardiovascular disease. The risk of obesity and diabetes is also decreased. And particularly in children, when children are in nature, they have less instances of myopia, which is nearsightedness, because instead of focusing exclusively forward on a screen, they're activating the peripheral vision, which is essential for healthy eyes. There's an article in The Guardian that states by 2050, there's an estimate that 40% of children and adolescents will suffer from myopia. So getting them outside and activating the peripheral vision, igniting the senses is really essential for them. And I think it's also important to say that I, for one, just feel better outside. It's just, you feel so much better, which is really important. Something that can't be overlooked with nature is the social connection. I can speak from experience on this by working with groups who I've known everyone in the group. I haven't known everyone. The group has been a group of mixed individuals, but the common thread that we all share is that we're sharing a nature experience together, but that we're all united in one, in one location. And there's studies that come out of UC Berkeley in the US about this, that nature promotes a sense of positive emotion. But through those positive emotions, we learn to trust one another, we cooperate better, and we have a true sense of closeness. And I can totally attest to that, which is a really beautiful experience. And particularly today when more people are isolated and spending time alone, getting people together in a natural environment kind of breaks down those barriers. And I remember I was on a tour with a group of women that I really didn't know. And by the end of it, we were all so close and we had such a remarkable experience. But I said to one of the women, why do you think this happens? And I feel like it always happens outside and in nature. And her response is, because in nature, no one's judging. Nobody's asking what you do for a living, where you live, how much you make. We're all on this very equal basis. We're surrounded by magnificence and beauty, and we're all kind of in this collectively. And I think that's a beautiful aspect of the natural world. Something else not to overlook is that some of our greatest thinkers sought inspiration and clarity in the natural world. A lot of our whether it be musicians or writers or naturalists, inventors, they cite that they would go into nature to clear their heads and to come up with inspiration for whatever it may be that they're working on. One of my favorites, Rachel Carson, who is an author of Silent Spring and responsible for the environmental movement in the US, was so connected to nature that it truly drove her work. Another part of why we need nature today now more than ever is that we need as many citizens engaged in the environment as we possibly can get. And that is anyone from scientists to everyday people to activists, politicians, companies, organizations who are engaged with the natural environment, but also can be stewards for the planets and advocates. Particularly in Switzerland, we have 1,400 glaciers, but we're losing our glaciers very quickly. There was an article I read by Daniel Farinati, who's a professor of glaciology at ETH, and he's stated that Switzerland's glaciers could vanish completely by 2100, which is absolutely tragic and will have global repercussions. The picture that I'm showing you here, we took at the Furka Pass at the Rhone Glacier, and you can see there's gentlemen, they're putting what are called geotextiles to cover the glacier to prevent glacial melt. And Professor Farinati states that this can prevent glacial melt up to 50 to 70%. However, this is not a scalable solution to a very large problem. And he also stated something that I think is really important, is that we have not studied the environmental repercussions of utilizing geotextiles. And we've been studying this glacier for a number of years and tracking, sadly, its demise and its retreat. And the last time we visited, the glacier is melting so rapidly that these textiles are now floating off as the glacier retreats into the lagoon, and then they're falling downstream. And I don't know if somebody's responsible for picking them up, what that does to the ecosystem, but it's certainly not, as he said, a scalable solution. So it's quite sad. And in 2025, the United Nations deemed it as the year of the glacier because it's so important that we work towards preserving the glaciers that we have left. And finally, I think it's important to note the sense of wonder and awe that comes from the natural world. I don't think you can ever spend time in nature without recalling at least one moment where you were completely infused by a transformative experience, whether it be a magical sunrise. We have a tradition in our family that on the 1st of January, we will watch the sunrise as a way to bring in the new year. And every time we go to this lookout and watch the sunrise, it feels like such a magical, captivating experience. And I always think to myself, how does it know? Like, just to come up at that perfect moment. And it's such a beautiful experience. And I think it reminds us that we're part of something so much bigger and so much more complex than we can ever imagine. There is a professor at UC Berkeley, his name is Dacher Keltner, and he recently released a book, and it's called Awe, the New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. And he profiles different areas that bring awe and wonder to humans. One of them is naturally nature and the natural world. I think also when we talk about wonder, we are just starting to tap into the complexity of the natural world. It's certainly complex and extraordinary. We now know that trees have the opportunity and they communicate. The powerful world of mycelium, how mycelium can thrive in toxic environments such as Chernobyl. And I heard a beautiful story about the innate wisdom of elephants, the memory of these elephants, their affinity for humans. And the story was so powerful to me that when I heard it, it literally brought me to tears. But it was a group of elephants that were in a part of Africa, and they had been mistreated, and they were going to put these animals down. And so they called this gentleman in South Africa Lawrence Anthony, and he lived on a reserve. And they said, look, you're our only hope. Will you take these elephants? And so he said he would take them. They brought the elephants up to his reserve. He knew that they had been mistreated and he needed to gain their trust. And so he would get in his truck and drive around and just park and stay in the truck. And over time, he would get out and let the elephants approach him. Well, he went on a business trip, but while he was away, he died. And those elephants gathered at his home. And every year on his death date for years, they would come to his house and they would mourn his loss. So the fact that they knew that he had passed, that they would gather in silence for years to come, just speaks to the fact that there's such an intelligence that we really are just starting to tap into. And so having exposure and being part of the natural world really brings us closer to that. And I'm going to talk briefly about why children need nature as an educator and as a parent and as someone who feels that parenting is such a complex journey, and there's no one manual to do it right, and you don't know how you're doing. But the one thing I can always fall back on is that my children grew up outside, and we really made that a priority in their lives. And Maria Montessori, I think, said it best when she said, when children come into contact with nature, they reveal their strength. My children have been hiking and traveling with us since they were in the womb. They have impressed us on so many occasions on their ability to hike up mountains, to cross ice banks, whatever it may be. Really, this is such a true statement. And exposing children to nature and allowing them this as part of their education is really part of their development. And something that made me quite sad was there was an article in April of 2025 in the Cambridge News, and it profiled a study of 500 children in the UK, and 38% of those children could not identify a ladybird or a ladybug. 61% had no idea what a daddy longlegs was, and more than half of them were unfamiliar with a slug. So like we're losing the language, children are also losing contact and the ability to identify nature objects. And Namuk just did a study. They're an outdoor sustainable clothing company in Switzerland, and they realized we live in a very isolated bubble. Everyone who works for the company, part of their ethos is being outside and in nature. Their customers obviously have an affiliation for the natural world, but they wanted to do a study that looked at Switzerland and how much time children are actually spending outdoors. So they polled over 1,000 parents who had children from the ages of 0 to 15, and they looked at both boys and girls equally. And they found that Swiss children are now spending about 1.5 hours outside per day. And almost all the parents polled said this was a drastic decrease from the time that they had spent outside as children. But for the children who did spend time outside, they reported being more connected with nature, they were more resilient, they experienced much better sleep, they spent less time in front of a screen, and they expressed higher levels of overall satisfaction. And I commend Namuk for this. We're not affiliated with them at all, but because of this, they did a challenge from May till, I believe, August, where they're encouraging families to spend more time in nature. So I think that's great. And in terms of childhood development, nature is such a phenomenal way to not only connect with your children. I always said when my kids were much smaller, on our worst days inside, what we always had to do was get outside. And if we could get outside, we were going to be fine. And it's really true. And some of our most beautiful, most hilarious, most awe-inspired moments have been outside as a family. But again, it activates children's senses. They have better cognitive development, less cases of myopia, which is really important today. And I'll also state for people who have children who may suffer from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that both of our children went through the Waldspielgruppe program. Never once did any type of behavioral issues come into play. Our children were always commended, particularly our son, for being active, engaged, moving around freely, testing limits. Those attributes were really praised in the natural world, where it's quite different when children are confined to a seat all day long. I think that's when we see more of the behavioral issues come into play. But in the natural world, those behaviors are really welcome. And for a child who has a hard time sitting in a chair and is a kinesthetic learner, the natural world is the perfect place for them to be. And a lot of children process information through movement, so they need that movement in order to learn. It also builds remarkable self-confidence as they learn the difference between perceived risk and actual risk. You'll see children kind of think through the process. Can I climb this rock? Can I not climb the rock? Can I jump over this puddle? Can I not? But this is, again, all part of their development. And one of my absolute favorite educational theorists, Howard Gardner, identifies that there are 9 different intelligences in people, and 2 of which are prime example of nature exposure for children. One is the nature smart individual. So you'll see these people outside and it just feels like an extension of themselves. They're at ease in nature. They're comfortable in this space. They really light up in it. They're also naturally inquisitive, and also the kinesthetic learner, the child who needs to be active and moving and pick things up and have tactile experiences. Nature is phenomenal for that. And we are so fortunate in Switzerland that we have ample access to the natural world. I think Switzerland does a remarkable job of the preservation of green space. Even living in cities, there are green walkways, there are trees, botanical gardens. Switzerland is also one of the few countries that practices the right to roam. We have 65,000 kilometers of hiking trails that are well maintained and groomed. We have theme trails for families, so if you have a family and you're trying to figure out how you can keep them motivated to walk, theme trails are ideal for that. We have lakes and open swimming areas. We have a phenomenal hut system. The Sac-Houtés have over 153 huts. So if you're looking for a way to be really immersed in nature, I would highly recommend a hut. And most of these locations are accessible through public transportation, making them even more appealing to individuals. Oops, I don't know if I can go back. Oh, I'm just going forward. Let's see, oh, there we go. So if you're looking for ways to increase outdoor time, the number one thing I can say is it needs to be a priority in your life. A great way to start the day is to go outside, to take a few deep breaths of fresh air, to have a coffee outside, to put your feet in the grass if you live on a first floor. Consider going on a retreat. Try a new sport that involves the outdoors. Join a group or organize a group. There are so many groups that really prioritize nature. Create a challenge for yourself. I know in the new year, last year, I wanted to do at least 4 hikes per month, which doesn't sound like that much, but when you're working and you have children and you're juggling everything, it is a lot. There are so many through hikes in Switzerland, so if you don't know where to go or what to do, last year we embarked on the Via Surprise, so each time we wanted to go on a hike, we would just continue where we left off. You can register for forest bathing courses. If you're someone who, like we live in a city, we almost always take our vacations in nature because we need that time to retreat and to feel better and to reset. If you have a garden, phenomenal, plant a garden. If you have a balcony, plant a balcony garden, that's definitely possible. If you're running an organization or work in a company, take meetings outside. Encourage having lunches outside. Have a coffee break outside. But just to break up the monotony of the day, consider reading outside, even to children. And before I close tonight, I just want to say that I provided you a great deal of quotes and statistics and information, but I don't think anything takes the place of how we feel outside and anecdotal evidence. I will always be a real advocate of the almost 20 years that we've spent in Switzerland raising our children. There's so many lessons that I've learned from each experience. but I can honestly say that I feel better. My family functions better outside, and that's so important. And one of my favorite authors who's just so beautifully spoken and written is Robin Wall Kimmer. And she said, action on behalf of life transforms. As we work to heal the earth heals us. And she's the author of Braiding Sweetgrass. And I think that's really powerful, that there is this interconnection. There is not a separation, that we're part of the earth and the earth is part of us. And without each other, we just don't exist. So I'll close it there and just say, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to try to field them at this time.